This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, so if Rabbeinu Tam was the most prominent of the Balei Tosfos, then the Hazakein is considered the architect of Tosfos. You see, all of the Balei Tosfos, it says over here that B'chein Rabbi mi Balei Tosfos. You have to know there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Balei Tosfos. Rabbeinu Tam at all times had 80 students, Balei Tosfos, that sat in front of him. Rabbeinu Tam was the most renowned of the Balei Tosfos. Each one had their own Tosfosin. Each Masechta had an editor of that Masechta. So we mentioned Rabbeinu Shmuel, grandson of the Hazakein, was the editor on Baba Kama. The Marame Rottenberg edited the Tosfos on Masechta Yuma. But the editor of Tosfos in general was the Hazakein. The Hazakein, Tosfos as we have it today, is the responsibility of the Hazakein. The Hazakein was the nephew of Rabbeinu Tam. You know, it's very interesting. Throughout Jewish history, you have great people. They often had a great uncle. You know, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Chazon Ish. No, yes, his father, but he had the Chazon Ish. So the Hazakein, we don't know much about Rabbeinu Tam's children. But Rabbeinu Tam had a sister. That sister had a child, Rabbeinu Yitzchak. Rabbeinu Yitzchak also lived a very long life, from 1120 to 1200. That's why it's called Hazakein. And this Hazakein is the architect of Tosfos. It's very interesting. The Piskei HaTosfos in Menachos brings down, you know, why don't we have 2 days of Purim? Why don't we have Sveika D'Yom of Chanukah? Because they're D'Rabbanans. We don't say Safek on a D'Rabbanan. So why don't you have 2 days Yom Kippur? Because who could fast 2 days Yom Kippur? People could barely fast 1 day, you know. On Tainus Esther, where it ends at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, people have a hard time. So the Hazakein fasted 2 days Yom Kippur. That's Yadua. The Hazakein fasted 2 days Yom Kippur. The Rosh writes that even though the Rambam was very great, if the Hazakein argues on the Rambam, you have to go like the Hazakein. The Hazakein was greater than the Rambam, b'chachma v'minyan. The Hazakein had 60 Talmidim who sat in front of him. Each Talmud was expert in a different Masechta. He knew Brachas, he knew Shabbos, he knew Erevin, he knew Psachim. And this way, any word the Hazakein would say, this one would say, oh, does that fit into Brachas, does that fit into Erevin, does that fit into Chulin? And this way, everything he said was cleared through Kol HaTorah Kula. As we mentioned, his son was Rabbeinu Elchanan. His grandson was Rabbeinu Shmuel, the author of the Tosfos in Masechta Moed Katan. Now, the Hazakein had a few primary Talmidim. Number one, the Ritzba. You ever hear of the Ritzba? Hiksha Ritzba in Tosfos. Hiksha Ritzba, he was a student of the Hazakein. Also, Rab Shimshon Bar Avraham. You know who that is? The Rashba. But not Reb Shlomo ben Aderes. We always say the Rashba. That was the Rashba of Spain. The Ritzba, one of the Balei Tosfos, was a student of the Hazakein, Rabbeinu Shimshon Bar Avram, or the Tosfos Shans. So this was the Hazakein. Now, it's mentioned here that this is also the burial spot of many hundreds of the Balei Tosfos. The Munkacher brings down that the Balei Tosfos lived during the times of the Crusades. Our tradition is that the night before they wrote their Perush, they knew they were going to be killed the next morning, and under those conditions, the Tosfos was written. So the city of Ramerrupt was a major academy, was a major center of the Balei Tosfos. Times of the Third Crusades, many of the Balei Tosfos accompanied the Crusaders. That was their access to Eretz Yisrael. Many hundreds of them made Aliyah. We're talking about now in the 12th century. And they couldn't have access to Yerushalayim, so they went to Acre, and they bribed the Crusaders, so they set up a yeshiva in the Crusade palace, in the fortress. You could go there today. Beis Medrash Hagadol of Paris, in Acre, in the north of Eretz Yisrael. But the reason why, while in Spain there were hundreds of thousands of forced conversions, but it was not really, did not really occur in France, it's because of the strength of Torah, of the Balei HaTosfos. Zechusam Yagein Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.